Welcome back. I am John P. Today we're going to be talking about 5 watch brands that are under the radar in 2023. Now, what do I mean by this? What is an under the radar watch or a watch brand? These are going to be different brands that you can wear and you can rest assured that it's very unlikely for it to be noticed on your wrist. Today, there are so many different reasons why someone might want one of these watches, whether it be theft or appearing too flashy or you name it. There's just different reasons why someone might not want to have a recognizable brand on their wrist. Now, if you're one of these people, I am certain that this list will have some great options for you. And the interesting thing is because watches have just become so much more popular as a hobby and as a lifestyle and more part of pop culture with a lot of crossing over and enmeshment with fashion as well, more people do recognize some of the lesser desired brands like Girard-Perregaux, so on, compared to the Rolex or the Audemars Piguet or the Patek Philippe's. Those people could recognize, but now even less noticeable or less in-demand brands are also recognizable, or they look like a watch that's recognizable. So these are going to be some remaining brands that you can try out. Now on the wrist today, I have a Breitling Endurance Pro. I actually really enjoy this watch. I wore it recently while traveling on Easter break here. And actually, if you can't tell, I've developed a cold while traveling, the different time zone changes and things like that. So I'm really making sure to put out a video here for you out there with a topic that I've been kind of mulling on for a while. If you want to see more about this as well as what goes on behind the scenes at Delray Watch, please check out my Instagram, The Real John P. You can see more about what I do, the watches I wear, what I get into, as well as the types of watches we buy, sell, trade at Delray. So the first brand that I think should be on your radar for being under the radar is Carl F. Bucher. Now, Carl F. Bucher, it's going to sound familiar right away, and that's because Bucher also is an authorized dealer or a chain of authorized dealers. They actually acquired Tourneau in the US, a very reputable authorized dealer from the past that was one of the earliest pre-owned sellers of watches, even one of the inspirations of us starting Delray Watch. So Carl F. Bucher is their a line that the Bucher family does own as well, and they sell them through their stores as well as authorized dealer and distributor networks out there. Now, why this watch brand makes the list is recently they've been doing some phenomenal things, including building an in-house movement that has a peripheral rotor system. Now, typically, you may have heard of micro rotors, you may have heard of normal rotors, but there's also this peripheral rotor where the outside of the movement is actually going to be the mechanism that is creating that force for winding the spring inside of the watch and creating the stored energy. So it actually floats on the outside, or it's actually positioned on the outside of the movement, the ring around it. And I think that's just so cool and interesting. Now, I'm not saying that it changes the world, but it shows that there's something a little bit unique and special, and Carl F. Bucher watches just do not get noticed. Now, keep in mind, with this brand, as well as the rest of the brands on this list, you can find great prices on them. Because they're under the radar, the desirability is not as high as something like a Rolex or even an Omega today. So you can get a phenomenal deal if you are willing to buy gray market, pre-owned, or not from an authorized dealer. Or maybe from an authorized dealer, even they'll toss out maybe a 30% discount. But try it out, Carl F. Bucher. I really think this is a brand to look out for. Now, the next one, and many people are going to know this, but it needs to make the list, and I'll spare you all the details because there's plenty of info out there, including videos I've previously done. This is Grand Seiko, or if you want to get fancy with it, Credor. Now, Grand Seiko, very obvious, the higher end version of Seiko, one of their, more notable product lines, and that's because they've been spending a lot of time and energy marketing it and pushing the higher end aspects of this brand. But additionally, there is Credor, and while many watch collectors recognize the Grand Seiko and many non-watch collectors will recognize the Seiko branding because they've been around for decades and they're just produced so many watches where it's kind of difficult to not know about Seiko. Credor does not use any of the Seiko naming or branding, although they are under the Seiko house. Now, Credor is not in the US per se. They do have some watches that make it here from travelers, but generally these are watches sold predominantly in Asia and to similar levels, if not better than what you would find from Grand Seiko, with the exception of the master workshop. So we're really splitting hairs at a certain level, but both Grand Seiko and Cradar are options to get a really high-end quality watch that also delivers a lot of bang for buck and is very unlikely to be noticed except for die-hard watch enthusiasts. Grand Seiko fanboys, leave in the comments below. I know we're gonna chime in there. I like the brand. Next, this is Ball. Ball watches, I almost view this brand as being one of the first micro brands. Now, they're not a micro brand, but I'll explain. Ball was invented in 1891 in response to a pretty horrific train crash that happened in Ohio. And basically these guys came up with the idea of, hey, we're gonna prevent train crashes in the future by putting some standards in our watches. We're gonna make very accurate watches for railroads. And that's kind of the idea behind it. It's kind of difficult to really know, like, okay, were the watches that they were using broken? Did it actually cause the train wreck, or did they just kind of blame it on the watches? Nonetheless, that's the idea and the marketing behind the Ball watch brand. But I'll say in probably about the year 2009, 2010, some of my earlier days of watch collecting, Ball actually had a pretty decent following. Micro brands didn't really exist like they do today, certainly not even close. And so Ball kind of played that role, and people that wanted something different, unique, and under the radar, they were attracted to Ball, right? This is kind of like the hot era of Panerai. And I remember walking into an authorized dealer, actually in Ohio of all places, probably not too far from where this train wreck occurred. And there was a waiting list for the Panerai watches actually, but they had Ball, and people were, totally different watches, mind you, but people were just kind of buying them as an impulse because they couldn't get the watch that they were looking for. And that's sometimes what the under the radar watches serve for people in their collections is, an alternative till someone can get the watch they're looking for. But I think Ball does make phenomenal watches. We've had plenty in the door at Delray Watch. I really like the hydrocarbon line. I like the Fireman line as well. The Engineer 1, the Engineer 2. They have phenomenal loom. Some of the loom has rainbow coloring as well. So it's a little quirky, unique, and fun. And I think they deliver you a lot of great value. And keep in mind, phenomenal deals on these watches because they produce a decent amount of them. Go to Chrono24. You can buy a Swiss Ball watch for maybe $500 pre-owned with the same type of movement and quality that you'd find in a watch several times the price point. And they're not a new brand, right? We're still talking about a brand from the 1800s. So I think that's just overall a lot of great value, and it's a good option for now. Now, next we have to talk about Zinn, or Zinn, if you will. Zinn watches. They're not new by any stretch of the imagination, but compared to the ones that we previously talked about, they are. Zinn typically is doing watches on their own terms. They make rugged, durable watches. They don't get too fancy with the movements, with the exception of a couple of movement-driven watches that they did decide to do in precious metal. They have a regulator watch, and they have a world time watch, and some of the watches that were not really in line with kind of the rugged, durable, sporting, military-esque or inspired field adventure type watches that they produce, because that's what people are known for, right? They're not necessarily looking for the most decorated, sophisticated movements because that takes away from rugged and durability, and it's a lot of time and attention put into things that don't matter for those particular watches. These watches are made out of tegimented steel, submarine steel, so that you can throw it in the ocean, you can whip it against the wall, you can throw it on the floor, you can bang it up against the different components in your engine while you're working on your car, stuff like that. You can go hunting with a Zinn watch. It might not be a watch that you're gonna, wear to ring the bell, opening up the New York Stock Exchange or something like that. But you could if you wanted to. But these are really adventure watches. And outside of the watch collecting community, even though Zinn produces so many watches, and people will, fight in the comments below and say, oh, everybody knows Zinn. People outside of watch collectors, especially in the US, do not have Zinn on their radar. And I think that's good because it delivers value, and it does allow a buying option for someone that wants a good quality watch, that doesn't want to pay, this high premium for something that everybody wants, not because it's a good watch, just because it's a thing that other people want. Now, times might be changing because Zinn has been known for doing their own thing, but last year, or maybe just the end of the year prior, they released these colorway Zinn 556 watches, one of their more approachable lines. But they do have the turquoise dial and some of the other more, fancy color dials that, first came Rolex that released the OP in those colors. Like I have my OP39 in red grape, and then you had Omega that copied it, but never really, those watches actually with the Aquaterra color dials, they never made it to stores. Keep in mind, that's another video for another time. But Zinn did kind of follow in that trend So time will tell, whether or not Zinn crosses over that barrier from enthusiasts to casual buyers in that kind of a way. Time will tell. Now they're a good option. I know there'll be the Zinn guys in the comments below that will chime in. Now, lastly, this is a brand that when we started Del Rey Watch, we had a bunch of them because this brand hit tough times for a while, but they've been back the last couple of years and they still don't have too much of a following. And it's unfortunate because I like some of their designs. This is Cuervo y Sobrinos. Now, Cuervo y Sobrinos, well, maybe not the current owners of the brand, some investors, maybe they don't have the history and the heritage. The brand certainly does. Before Cuba, was what it is today, there was a time where there was enterprise and some level of free trade enterprise there. We don't have to get into a history lesson, but Cuervo y Sobrinos did have a jewelry store, an authorized dealer, and they were both having watches made for them and some contract manufacturing, as well as some co-branding of notable brands that they were selling in Cuba, in Havana. But what we see here is kind of companies and people and entrepreneurs in the watch industry that have taken that kind of shell in the history, spiced it up, and made Latin-inspired, Cuban-inspired watches that come shipped in a humidor. Now, I think the designs of these watches are pretty cool, some of them. Not all of them appeal to me, but generally the brand is aimed towards someone that wants something different, something that's not going to be recognizable. But generally, there's also a lot of it's a masculine brand, let's say it. The watches come in a humidor, and a lot of the imagery, at least when this brand was starting to become a little more popular, that was kind of who it was focused on. They wanted to go after the guy that enjoys a drink and a cigar and, put on, this watch. And it would be the watch for that type of, guy's guy, relaxing, maybe late stage career, retired man. And that's who these watches tend to do pretty well with. Even when we get them at Del Rey Watch, that tends to be the person that's buying this watch when we talk to them on the phone, just anecdotally. But nonetheless, I think that they deliver great value. They're using the same kind of movements that you'd find at anyone else at more than the price point as well. But especially their precious metal versions of the watches seem to be particularly having very low demand. Precious metal often costs a premium to get, right, compared to steel. Not always, but in other brands that aren't Rolex, Patek, Philippe, Audemars Piguet, yeah, that's going to be the case. Precious metals are going to just cost a little bit more. But with Cuervo y Sobrinos, something about the precious metal just doesn't attract people. And if you're looking for a precious metal dressier watch, something quirky, unique, and interesting, Cuervo y Sobrinos does tick that box, and it's going to be a great value. We had one recently in at Del Rey Watch, and I really liked the way that it fit. I thought the design was very Art Deco, and a little classy, but kind of casual in the same kind of a way. And you could feel that it had a very kind of, Latin-inspired design aesthetic to it. I liked it, and I think that if you are looking for something quirky, check out Cuervo y Sobrinos, especially their back catalog. So, what do we think? Are there any other brands or models that you would add to the list of watches that are under the radar, not only for everyone, but even maybe watch collectors? I'd love to see it and hear it in the comments below. Guys, please do not forget to thumbs up, like, and subscribe. I appreciate it. You can find plenty of watches for sale at delreywatch.com. You can find my Instagram, The Real John P. We'll see you next time. You've been chatting with John P.